Another way that the process of ascension could be explained, I guess, is to look at it that we are all moving up out of an inversion and back to our normal selves, in a sense. When people say the matrix is stopping or we're coming up out of the matrix, we're ascending up out of the matrices, they mean like the inversion. So basically everything in our 3D realm, the whole systems, the ideologies, the beliefs, how everything operates is an inversion. I guess you could say an inversion to Christ, or an inversion to Christ consciousness, or basically just an inversion to the truth. It's an inversion. And we've been taught to work within this inversion for a very long time. And at this time period, the ones who are choosing ascension are choosing to flip that inversion. So they are doing a deprogramming within their minds. They're becoming spiritually aware, and they are flipping, in a sense, to a higher frequency, moving up, you could say, out of the 3D consciousness. Now, in a sense, you can look at the whole place as an inversion in the way that it is inverted from the truth, the way that it operates. So if you want to look at what 3D consciousness is, that is usually based around root chakra stuff, money, greed, lower vibrational emotions, and unhealed traumas, and attachments to the system, attachments to the ego, which is the system. So we're worried about our materialism. We're worried about what looks good, what appears good to other people, wearing a mask, playing along in the game. And there's nothing wrong with that. In a sense, it's the level of the root chakra learning. That's where that consciousness is choosing to learn, like in a level in a video game. But when you start to come up out of the inversion and that flips, you will no longer be able to vibrate, in a sense, in resonance with that lesson anymore, because you've already passed it. So there's nothing for you to learn there. That's a south node energy, they might say in astrology. Okay, so for all of us now that are starting to go through this awakening, and we're questioning and we're pushing back against the system, and we're using our voice and all of these things, that is basically unconsciously what we're doing, because we're all doing that at this time. In a sense, we're moving towards a north node energy. We're detaching from the south node, from the karmic lessons, from the patterns that keep us restricted and chained. And in doing that, that flipping requires a transmutation, requires a facing pain, requires an ability to have a conscious conversation or admit to your thoughts, okay? So that you're able to kind of see, now I can move out of the inversion. Now I can move myself up out of that. And that doesn't happen overnight, of course. But understanding that everything working within the 3D consciousness is an inversion. It is all kind of just a matrices that is placed there within reality to keep you kind of stuck on this hamster wheel of thinking that you need to have and be and do and impress and follow and hide, right? That is kind of the lower aspects, and we're working through, it's like a lesson plan, and we work through that lesson plan in a sense. But for those of us that are ready to leave the lesson plan, we're the ones who are starting to wake up now, and we're the ones who will be questioning things and speaking out loud and going through really difficult lessons, because we're meant to permanently come up out of the inversion. So just kind of some things I was thinking about what is actually happening when we're coming into, I guess, like Christ consciousness, or, I mean, there's a million different labels for these things, right? But the process of ascension is just basically a quickening of the frequency and moving to a higher density space to wake up out of this kind of dream sleep and into another. We're moving from one classroom and into another. And that new classroom looks like understanding how to connect to spirit, understanding that the limitations in the inversion were not real, and that when you understand energy, you have the ability to create and manifest, and you are that powerful, and that is a real thing. But through that requires a breaking through the shadow side that many people aren't brave enough to do, and some might not necessarily have to do that in this lifetime if they're not choosing to awaken, if they're not choosing to come up out of the inversion. But when you do, you will have a, what you want to call dark night of the soul, ego death, that will be very stripping of your soul, usually, in a sense, for most people. Okay, so that's kind of, I would say, the marker, the understanding to say, oh, okay, like, yeah, I am really going through ascension. But yeah, understanding that it's all just a school, and understanding how the inversion works. The inversion, or coming up out of the 3D, now that maybe we've expanded beyond it a little bit, we can look down and we can see how it operates. And now we're all talking about narcissism and manipulation and demonic, things, and the dark, and how the dark operates. Because in a sense, that inversion that's hiding in the dark, that's there for that manipulation to keep us in that space, now that our consciousness is expanding, we can see it, and we're like, oh, that's how that works. That was keeping me chained. That was keeping me bound. That's just a belief system that's not actually true. And then you have that splitting of the consciousness, right? Because those who are going through that awakening are now conversing with those who are choosing to not go through that awakening, or are not coming up out of the inversion yet. And they're still going to be running on belief systems and thought patterns and ways of being that are going to completely clash with that person that is choosing to expand their consciousness in this lifetime. Okay, and these things are put on a soul level contract. Your soul chooses all of this stuff to kind of go through, because you're closing out so much karma and so many things, right? So yeah, it's just kind of cool to look at that and understand that now that we're coming up out of that inversion, now we can look down at the dark and say, oh my God, I used to act that way, or this is why this is happening, or I understand how this operates. And we're seeing this kind of like polarizing effect now of the consciousness, and you can say 3D, 5D, or however you want to put it. And it's interesting because it's taking a really large healing and an open mind to be able to expand into that new space. And some are going through this and some aren't. And yeah, it's all good. But I like to just kind of muse on about it, because I always, for those who don't know me specifically, I channel predominantly how Ascension works, which is why I talk about Ascension specifically. So I'm kind of always given just this like broad understanding, this guidance, this complete understanding of metaphysically and situationally, if that's a word, and internally how the whole process of Ascension works. So I always like to kind of just come on here and talk, like through Ascension talks, to just take a deeper look into metaphysically what's actually happening, because that's all that we are, right? We're just sort of packets of light going through this experience on a spiritual level, and it doesn't necessarily feel like that when we're in our human bodies. It can be pretty difficult and pretty daunting to navigate this experience. And it's obvious that it's happening because it's getting very intense. I think that 2024 has really been a space where a lot of people have really gone through the ringer. It's been the year of karma, and for some people that's good, and for some people it's not. But it's been very intense for most people I've spoken to, including myself. It's probably been the worst year of your life. It could have been, very much so. But again, depending on who you are and your placements and your mission and all that kind of of thing. But it's necessary to go through that denseness. It's necessary to go through that denseness so that you can come out the other side and you can say, okay, whoa. A lot of that as well, looking at it from the human side, is confusing because you're doing work that is of the inversion, for lifetimes of the inversion. So some of the stuff that you're clearing or the karma you're working through isn't necessarily your own. It could extend so far down the bloodline and actually have nothing to do with you in the sense of situationally, like as a human being, right? And a lot of us as well, coming up out of that inversion, are breaking generational curses. And all of that is very, very, very accurate and real. It all really ties into this whole process. Because if you think about leaving the inversion, leaving that aspect of consciousness, everything has to be wrapped up. Everything has to be tied up. All contracts have to be balanced out and even. Everything has to be out into the open. So right now it's almost like we're in this shifting space where it's like everything's coming out into the open, and all of the stuff you have to deal with, all of the unhealed stuff, all of the stuff that's been hidden, everything that's been stuck down in that inversion. It's like, okay, we're just going to shine a big light on this because we're going to leave here pretty soon. Okay, so we have to take a look at this and understand what's going on here. In Christian doctrine, you know, they would talk about the rapture and things like that. This is almost like an energetic way of looking at how that actually works. Okay, like we are being harvested into the next consciousness. Whether or not you believe that you're actually going to ascend like Jesus says or not is entirely up to you and relevant to your journey. Personally, you know, I do look at things in terms of energetically we're moving into a new space. And it has been described that way to me through a lot of QHHT clients when they're under hypnosis. It has been channeled to me personally, kind of how this whole thing works in a sense. But we can talk about it in terms of Christ consciousness, meaning the higher vibration that we are moving into is going to be more closer to that of the vibration of Jesus Christ, to those messages. We're going to be much more connected to the gods that we actually are, and what that looks like to live in that morally honest, ethical way. And that's why those that are coming in now that are spewing the truth and spreading the truth, they're doing that to awaken everyone to the inversion, to say, hey, you have to learn this and you have to see this and you have to accept it before you can accept moving into the higher frequency. We have to forgive it. We have to first see it and know it before we can forgive it, before we can continue to let those higher vibrations come in a way, right? Because we can't move to the higher frequency. We won't be a match to the higher frequencies without it. And that's why, in a sense, shadow work's so important and healing is so important. Because when you go to manifest, when you start tapping into your manifestations, or your ability to manifest, you're going to have energetic residue cleaned up, right? So that's why that healing is so important. And going through that portion of the awakening process is so important.